Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Nick Juskewycz of DailyFantasyWinners bringing you an episode of Tee to Green, and this is the Part 2 edition of the Open Championship preview, and this is going to be the picks. Part 1 covered the overview and the strategy of the Open Championship, so make sure you check that out to get an idea on where I'm coming from with all these upcoming picks. Before we dive into the specifics, this is a reminder that weather can definitely play a massive role at the Open Championship. How should you strategize for this? You should have a plan A and a plan B. Plan A should not consider weather at all whatsoever. Just go with what picks you think are best and go with what exposure and ownerships are best for you and what you want to do as far as your game plan. And then plan B should be considering the weather, because weather can certainly play an impact in particular at the Open Championship. However, the weather is, again, unpredictable at the Open Championship, and you should be waiting until Wednesday evening to make this decision. So when you get to Wednesday evening or Wednesday night, and remember, as a reminder, this does lock at midnight on Wednesday Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Pacific Time. And if it looks like there won't be a weather advantage at all, just stick with Plan A and what you want your lineups to be. If it does really look like there will be a tee time advantage, then you can switch to Plan B and then edit your lineups as such. Keep one thing in mind on this, and I touched on this in Part 1. Is that you can do something where you could hedge your Plan A strategy. It is just, you could make a couple, just in case the weather does become brutal, is you can make a couple lineups that do favor one tee time, and then make a couple lineups that also favor the other tee time wave. It's in the past, there's also been times where it doesn't look like there's going to be much of a weather advantage, and it does turn out that way. Or even times where it really looks like there is going to be a weather advantage toward one tee time, it actually turns out it helps the other tee time wave. That actually happened last year, because what happened was there was the wind delay and the brutal weather that came in at one point, and then sometimes they play through it, and then sometimes they end up having to take a delay because the course is essentially unplayable with the ball just blowing all over the green, or there's actually standing water on the course. So you never know exactly what you're going to get. So sometimes if you want to, as part of a strategy, it's up to you. You could hedge and do lineups both ways, essentially, if you want to do that. But just make sure you have two plans in mind going into Wednesday evening. So these picks are not considering weather at all. I'm doing this on a Tuesday afternoon, early evening right now, so there's no point in trying to tell you to target a certain specific picks toward a tee time wave. So in any case, and also lastly, I'll just say before I dive into the specifics here, you can check out the Golf Channel for weather as well. Sometimes they actually have actual meteorologists that are tied into having golf knowledge, and specifically and what you can expect kind of coming up throughout the tournament. And even then, they're not the most accurate, but they will certainly be more accurate than most of the things you'll find online, or just making your own predictions on it. Golf Channel is actually a good place to tune into that, and I'm sure they'll have some stuff throughout the day on Wednesday. Okay, I'm going to give my A list here, my top picks. On the forum, I'm going to have a full sheet of the golfers who I would basically consider a Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, etc. at each price point. It won't just be an A and a B list this week. I'm not going to do the exact ownership projections or what I would recommend for all the golfers like I've done in the past majors. The only reason is everybody's making a different amount of lineups, and some people get a little bit confused about what they exactly mean for how many entries. So I'm just going to do every golfer kind of a Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 at each price point. So, and depending if you're making 5 or 10 lineups, or you're making the max 150 and not 200 this week, you can just kind of adjust accordingly with what the realistic numbers would be there. So, okay. This is the top picks. We're going to elaborate a little bit here on this first pricing group. So the first pricing group are the top 4 players: Jason Day, Dustin Johnson, Rory McIlroy, Jordan Spieth, all between $12,300 and $11,700. Obviously, there's the talk about the big 4, but they're kind of priced as such as well, so we will address it this way, because I do think there is going to be some ownership drop off there after the top 4. Of these top 4, I like Day the most. The sportsbooks having him at 8 or 9 to 1 this week, I just think is flat out wrong. His ability to adjust to conditions and different golf courses, whether he's bomb and driver, or in his ability to really hit 2-iron and just smoke it down the middle and hit a low ball flight with it, is crucial to his success in being able to adapt to different golf courses, which I think is going to be very important for a place like Troon. So Jason's definitely my favorite of the top four. He will probably be owned in the low 20% range, but I don't. That's not enough that would stop me from anybody, no matter how many lineups you're making, to certainly use Jason Day as much as that or more than that. I think Day is the best pick in the field easily, and he's kind of priced as such where there's fees around three other guys, and I just think Day is definitely on another level than the rest of the three. This is nothing new if you've been following my stuff and from what he's got going on statistically. Of the other three, obviously Dustin will be one of the highest and probably the highest owned, actually in the 25 to 30% range is my guess. A fair amount of places are probably recommending him, fading him, just because of that high ownership. But I will say this, and keep this in mind, this all depends, again, on how many lineups you are making. I'm going to dive into this more specifically in my next strategy video, which I definitely plan on doing before the PGA Championship, hopefully before the tournament next week. But I'm hoping it will definitely be done at least before the PGA Championship. But basically, if you're someone who's making a ton of lineups, fading the high salary guys is very dangerous. Anyone who is at least above $10,000 and probably more likely $9,000 are most likely going to make the cut. The difference in a player making the cut between a $10,000 level guy and a $7,000 level guy is massive. You may not think so when you're looking at the salaries when you have the cuts made column on DraftKings, but the players in the 7K column often play weaker tournaments or tournaments with weaker fields, basically, that basically spike their cuts made percentage, if you will. The best players most often play in the bigger tournaments, so it's not exactly an even comparison. So that's why when we look at a major, there really is a big difference between the two when you're talking about somebody being able to make the cut, not just win the tournament. And the primary bonus really when you're fading someone is for the player to miss the cut. So if you're just making a handful of lineups, then it's okay to fade some more of the top salary guys because you just simply only have so many roster spots. But when you're talking about maxing out the lineups or even just making 50 or 100 or something, fading the high salary guys is a dangerous move. So just keep that in mind with the thing with Dustin. Do I think he could win the golf tournament? Certainly, absolutely. But I think his 8-1 to 9-1 odds and saying he's as good as Jason right now is premature, and I think it's a bit inflated with him winning his last two events. And I just would not want to simply roster Dustin 30% of lineups. That would not be my choice. So. The lowest owned of the four, I think, will be Jordan Spieth, and I'm guessing it'll be about 15% for Jordan. This is a little bit on the low side, considering his price has not changed much since last year. He's always been one of the top price golfers. He's just not the top price golfer, but he's still right there at the top. The difference between 11,700 and 12,300, obviously not very much. So if you just want to play the ownership game straight up with the top salary golfers, then I don't mind using him some. I like the fact that he's had a chance to get to Royal Troon early, even though he was a shot out of the playoff last year, and he played the John Deere the weekend before. But I do think it will be beneficial that he's getting there a little bit earlier. His body clock can get adjusted. I really like the fact that he's obviously one of the best putters on tour, and he's really good at lag putting as well, which is also actually another reason why I really like Jason Day on this course. Is he's a very good lag putter, one of the best. He's statistically the best putter on tour this year. But I think Spieth's lag putting is very good on these massive greens. What I'm most concerned about though with Jordan is his accuracy off the tee. It's always kind of been an issue, but it's been more of an issue as of late, and his approaches to the green just hasn't been very good as a result. This isn't really a golf course you can get away with bad swings very often. It's a kind of a tighter British Open course in comparison to some of the others, and you can't just get away with as many bad swings as you can at a place maybe like Augusta National, where Spieth has had obviously some very good success at. So he's not a top play for me since he isn't the greatest fit, but he is a bit of a buy low option if you want to play the ownership game and go that route. Okay, let's move on to the next guy, Adam Scott at 10,600. He is definitely a top pick for me. He's going to be sort of, I think, the forgotten one here, because I think a lot of people really are going to use one of the top four guys in their lineups, and just because it's such a soft salary structure, because you have so many cheap guys in the 6K range who are certainly usable in this tournament. So I just think there's going to be a lot of people, a lot of DFS players using the top four guys in the DraftKings field. So in any case, but here's Adam Scott, who has finished in the top 10 in his last 4 Open Championships, and he should have won in 2012 when he blew the big lead and Ernie Els came back to win it. He's been quietly playing some very solid golf in the last couple months and has been there really, like, as far as, kind of right there as at top 10s, essentially. He just hasn't quite been there in contention in the final hour or two on Sunday, and he's clearly a threat to win the golf tournament. All right, let's move on down to the 9K range. And actually, by the way, one great strategy thing this week also is if you don't want to use Adam Scott for whatever reason, and since I did just mention there will be a lot of people using the people of the top 4 golfers, I think you could also start with just 9K guys with starting your GPP lineups. I think that's a pretty good strategy, and just using multiple 9K guys. So just keep that in mind for when I'm reading off these next few players. Okay. At 9,700, Brandon Grace. It's only a matter of time before he wins a major championship. His game has really evolved over the last year, and he's played well on multiple types of courses, and essentially he's a versatile golfer. And that's something I really emphasized in part 1 of the Open Championship preview. His accuracy, you look at it on paper, may not be the greatest off the tee, but he's played very well on courses where you need to be accurate off the tee because he doesn't just stick to his driver like some of the other players will. You take a look at Brandon Grace's like RBC win. At Harbor Town. That's like the course that you do not, that's like one of the top courses you do not hit driver on, and you have to be accurate off the tee. So that would just be one of several examples actually of Brandon Grace. So I think he will not be that highly owned, maybe in that 10-12% range, and I would have no problem going with a higher ownership than that on him easily. I think you can, you're getting some good value there, and it's really only a matter of time before he wins a major. All right, next at 9,500 is Henrik Stenson. FantasyLabs projections, since we do stuff with FantasyLabs, they really like him a lot. I liked him a lot regardless of it before I even got started on the research, on the primary research of this. But whether it was FantasyLabs' basic model or the one I created, he was at the top of the list actually in the entire thing. And that's really because his scoring average is just that good, whether it's recent form or you're talking about over the last year or two. He just doesn't quite win as many big tournaments as maybe some of the other golfers around his price point, I guess, would maybe be more the accurate thing to say. But he really is, his scoring's been absolutely fantastic. His ownership will probably be in 12, 13%, something like that, maybe 15, but I still don't think it'll be quite that high. So I would have no problem going that 15 to 20% range if you're making a bunch of lineups or just, whatever you're doing. I really like Stenson this week as far as however many lineups you're making. Doesn't matter as far as how many you're making. So anyways, moving on down to Louis Oosthuizen at 9,000. He's always overlooked for whatever reason, and he's been fairly under-owned and overlooked his last few tournaments, and he's actually been priced much cheaper than this in some tournaments of lesser competition, I will say, or of equal value at least. And so he's obviously an Open champion, and he made the playoff last year and lost that 3-way playoff to Zach Johnson, and Mark Leishman was involved with it as well. So he will probably get a little bit of a bump in ownership in there just because of the recent memory and being a former champ, but I still expect him to be under 10% since his price is up to $9,000, which is pretty much primarily because he is an Open champ and made the playoff last year. So the price kind of takes care of it and will probably scare off that bump, maybe if you will, and he'll still be owned like 7-8%. It's very much possible. So I really like Louis Oosthuizen this week. I'll always buy him with that kind of low ownership, and definitely a good chance to win the tournament. Okay. In the 8K range, a couple European golfers who I think will be on the low ownership side of things because of simply who is going to be priced around them. So there are going to be some fade candidates. There's going to be a fade list at the end of this video, and it's somewhat lengthy. So definitely stick around toward the end of the video for that. But in any case, the two picks in the 8,000 range are both Euros. Lee Westwood, 8,500. Martin Kaymer at 8,400. For Westwood, he's been on cruise control, quite frankly, since the Masters, despite his 80 at the U.S. Open on Sunday. But outside of that, he's pretty much been in cruise control mode. He can still hit it a long ways, which he's got a pretty low ball flight, which is really good for the wind, and he's a great ball striker, and has obviously had very good success in Open Championships. Still, I don't think we'll have that high of ownership at 8,500. And then Martin Kaymer, he's been quietly killing it on the European tour this year. Just hasn't done quite as well in the States, but hey, this is the Open Championship. He's had he's a former #1 player in the world. He has outstanding talent. He's exceptionally good around the greens when it comes to links golf as well, with these massive greens and dealing with wind conditions and things like that. And his ball striking is much improved since he hit a little bit of his drought this last year. Ball striking is much improved, which is obviously a very good sign. To the 7,000 range, 3 guys in this area. Paul Casey at 7,900, great upside and should have lowish ownership. At 7,700, Brandt Snedeker. I spent some extra time researching Brandt, and just to see, and I've kind of talked about this fairly frequently in these Tee to Green episodes over the course of the year, but I really spent some extra time with this week off just trying to find any kind of evidence, whether it's watching Snedeker hit golf balls, in some of the previous tournaments, or just looking for anything in the news to see if there's anything in particular like still flaring up with the rib issue he's battled in the past before. And there's just, I can't find a trace of evidence of it. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, or maybe there is possible that it's out there, but and he may not just be talking about it, but essentially I can't find anything. And so Snedeker is way better than this price point, and I know he's been some inconsistent, over the course of the year since the West Coast swing ended, but he's actually had some pretty good finishes as well within that inconsistency. So, and I think Snedeker, because of, again, a lot of the guys that are priced around him, he shouldn't have that high of ownership. So I like Brandt for what value you're going to get there. And then lastly, and if this is a bit of my dark horse pick, if you will, at 7,000 to win the tournament, again, a dark horse pick, I emphasize that, but at $7,000, Francesco Molinari. He's just playing fantastic golf. He's particularly good on the European Tour, great all-around game. Somebody that usually when I've picked him in the past in specific tournaments, he has done very well. I've usually had good history with him and picking him in good spots. So just I'll throw that in for some icing on top, I guess. So just also a quick note, I have a bunch of guys in the low 7,000 range who I don't think will be owned that much, or won't be too high, kind of like under 5%, if you will, I'll just say roughly. But just keep in mind in the forum that these guys are going to be on the tier 2 list, and I'll make note of this, that they're in the tier 2 list, but they really are close to the tier 1 as well. There's a bunch of guys in this low 7K region. I'll address that one more in the forum. So just keep in mind, there are going to be a lot of guys in the 8K and the upper 7K range that I think are going to be over-owned in this tournament. So you're going to get some value there in the low 7K range. But let's move on to the 6K range. I'm just going to rattle these guys off. These are all guys that are kind of my tier 1 for 6K, and there's a lot of them. I'm not saying you should own them a bunch, but just because you don't need to own these guys a bunch, because I'm picking some guys that I think will still be kind of lower owned, and so you don't have to commit that much ownership and that much risk to these guys, if you will. So we're starting at the upper 6,000 range, moving on our way down. Billy Horschel at 6,800, David Lingmerth at 6,700. Joust Luden, I think it's Joust. I hear Juiced or Used a lot of the time, but I've heard recently that it's actually Joust, so I apologize one way or the other. I think it's Joust is the correct pronunciation. At 6,500, he's playing really good golf right now. Bert Weisberger at 6,500 as well. At 6,400, somebody I pick very often, Emiliano Grillo, and at 6,300, this guy is borderline high ownership, and you may not want to use him if you want to fade. This was a borderline fade for me on the ownership, but I do really like him a lot, so I threw him in here at 6,300. Danny Lee, certainly a very reasonable price. And then a couple Americans at 6,100, and Brandon Steele and Robert Streb, both at 6,100 each. Lastly, one more pick at 5,500. This is kind of a FantasyLabs special, and I actually like the way he's been playing as of late. And I hope I'm pronouncing this right. At 5,500, Hidetu Tanihara, I believe is how you say it. I hope I got that right. He won his last 2 events on the Japanese tour, and DraftKings doesn't show Japanese tour events, in their database. So he made the cut at the U.S. Open earlier this year. He hasn't played the British since 2008, but he did put up a top 5 in 2006 at the British Open. I'm obviously not saying that's relevant to how he's playing now, but historically he has shown he can play links golf. and is playing really well in the Japanese tour right now. He's somebody that just will be probably 1% owned, maybe at most actually on DraftKings. So if you want to throw him a couple lineups, that's really not a bad idea in my opinion. My computer is about to die in a second, so I better hurry up here. I just got a notification. So in any case, I'm going to tell you the fade list right now really quickly. These are guys I think are just going to be too highly owned at their specific price points, so that I would just recommend fading them all together. Zach Johnson at 8,100, Bubba Watson at 8,000, Charles Schwartzel at 7,800, Matt Kuchar at 7,800, Scott Piercy at 7,400, Alex Noren at 6,900, just won the Scottish Open, Rafa Cabrera-Bello at 6,900. It kind of pains me to say that one since I think Cabrera-Bello can do very well, but his ownership should be at least 15%, which is too much. And then John Ram at 6,700. Kind of the same deal here. You know, he's a new prospect, and he's done very well since, whether he was an amateur or turning pro, he's been doing very well in a few of these pro events this year. But again, his ownership's going to be like in probably that 10 to 15% range, and DFS players just really are into kind of like new prospects, even in golf and not just a sport like baseball. So in any case, he's been awesome in the few events he's been this year. So I would recommend still fading him in his young career for what the ownership will be at this price point. And that's it for the fade list. And so Zach and Bub, I'll just throw in this at the last second for 8,100 and 8,000. They are borderline fade prospects because they really, I mean, Zach's the defending champ, obviously, but I think Zach and Bubba could be 20% owned, and I hate owning or recommending people owning somebody at 20% at around $8,000. That's just too much, and they're that low for a specific reason. So just want to throw that out there. That is all for this video. Check out the forum on Daily Fantasy Winners again for discussion on the Open Championship and where you can find all the golfers, or discussion on where all the golfers fall into in the specific price points in the Open Championship. We'll talk about the weather, some different strategies, and everything like that. So please remember to like and subscribe to our Twitch and YouTube channels, and you can follow me on Twitter at Juskewycz and Daily Fantasy Winners at DFSnerd. All right, good luck, everybody.